There are 20 Primarchs in Warhammer 40,000, 20 genetically engineered demigods crafted by the Emperor of Mankind in the late 30th millennium using his own genetic material, each one the gene father of a Space Marine legion. Thousands of transhuman soldiers who carried fragments of their Primarch's biology, shaped by his temperament, his homeworld, his specific brand of psychosis. 20 suns, 20 legions, one plan to unite a fractured galaxy, and a suspicious number of them end up in the Eye of Terror, which must be like Disneyland but for demons. If you've watched a Primarch explainer that gave you a headache from all the wrong lore, this is the corrective. Specific mechanisms, named artifacts, actual Black Library novel titles. Because chaos corrupted him isn't lore, it's a caption. The audience that reads these books deserves more than captions. Fast definitions before we begin. Space Marines are transhuman soldiers, each one built from the genetic blueprint of his Primarch. The Eye of Terror is a massive permanent warp rift in the galactic northwest, the warp being the psychic dimension that underlies reality and functions for all practical purposes as hell. Chaos is the corrupting force that lives there, powered by negative emotion and hungry for exactly the kinds of people these stories are about. The Primarchs are, above all of that, the demigods those forces spent 10,000 years fighting over. The Chaos Gods scattered the 20 Primarch gestation capsules through the warp before their maturation was complete. Each landed on a different world, raised with no knowledge of what he was. The Emperor spent approximately 180 years, from around M30.801 to M30.981, recovering them one by one. He started with Horus. Horus Lupercal, homeworld, Chthoniya, Primarch of the Luna Wolves, later renamed the Sons of Horus. He spent 30 years as the only Primarch the Emperor had found. 3 decades of the Emperor's undivided attention before anyone else entered the picture. No hierarchy of brothers yet established, no competition for trust. By the time the Great Crusade found the others, Horus was already the most powerful person in the galaxy, below the Emperor himself. At the triumph of Ulanor, the celebration marking the defeat of the largest orc empire humanity had encountered, the Emperor named him War Master, supreme commander of all imperial forces. His fall is specific, and the specificity is the point. A word-bearer called Erebus had stolen a weapon from a human civilization called the Interrex, a semi-sentient blade with a flint edge and a golden hilt, chaos-blessed, called the Anathame, introduced in Horus Rising by Dan Abnett. Erebus gave it to a corrupted imperial commander named Yugen Temba, and arranged for Temba to be on Davin's moon when Horus arrived. Horus fought Temba, took the Anathame across his body, and the wound wouldn't close. Standard medicine couldn't explain it. Erebus then maneuvered Horus's inner circle into taking him to a Davinite serpent lodge, a chaos cult operating under the appearance of a healing tradition. The ritual healed the wound while Horus was in a coma state. It also opened him completely to warp influence during that coma, and what Horus experienced inside that lodge is what finished the corruption. That sequence plays out in False Gods by Graham McNeil, Book 2 of the Horus Heresy series. Not chaos corrupted him. A specific blade stolen from a specific civilization. A specific wound arranged by a specific word-bearer who had been maneuvering toward this for years. Erebus designed the access point. The ritual did the rest. Horus led the civil war that bears his name. He died aboard his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, during the Siege of Terra, killed by the Emperor in their final confrontation. Confirmed dead. Before the Heresy. Before Horus is War Master. Before any of the politics. Angron already has something hammered into his skull. The Butcher's nails are cranial implants, formerly called cruciamen in the language of Nuceria, the world where Angron, born Angronius of Nuceria, Lord of the Red Sands, was enslaved as a gladiator. The ruling aristocracy used them on gladiatorial slaves to maximize combat performance, a pain-pleasure feedback loop tied to violence, stimulating aggression and rewarding combat with the only neurological relief the host system would produce. They also progressively destroyed brain tissue. Angron's brain attempted to heal the damage continuously. The nails responded to each healing attempt by inflicting more trauma. He was being eaten alive from the inside by devices his slavers installed when he was a captive. When the Emperor arrived on Nuceria, Angron had gathered fellow gladiators and led them in open revolt. The Emperor didn't help the revolt. He teleported Angron away from the battle and left those people to fight and die without him. Angron had known them for years. They were the closest thing to family his captivity had produced, people who had chosen to fight back together. The Emperor took him away and watched them lose. Angron never forgave it. He was placed in command of the World Eaters, renamed from the Warhounds, a legion he didn't want, serving a father he considered a coward for the abandonment. The World Eaters' culture of berserker aggression was already there before Angron arrived. He made it exponentially worse by eventually ordering his legion to adopt modified versions of his own implants. The Emperor and his Mechanicum ally, Archenland, examined the nails and reached one conclusion. Master of Mankind, by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, contains the scene. The neural tendrils had grown into Angron's brainstem and replaced cognitive structures that no longer existed anywhere else in his nervous system. There was nothing functional beneath them. Removing them would certainly kill him. They stayed. This distinction matters. The Butcher's nails aren't Chaos technology. They predate Angron's contact with Chaos entirely. They are Nucerian gladiatorial control equipment installed by slavers. His fall to Khorne is connected to the nails. The bottomless rage they sustained over a lifetime was exactly what the blood god required. But the nails themselves were there first. They shaped the rage. Chaos consumed it. The World Eater's modified version was less invasive than Angron's, which had replaced irreplaceable brain tissue, but it drove the entire legion toward uncontrollable violence that made them devastating in close combat and nearly impossible to deploy with any strategic subtlety. Angron ascended to demon princehood under Khorne during the Siege of Terra. Angron, Slave of Nuceria, by Ian St. Martin, covers his complete arc. In current M42 lore, he led the Blood Crusade in real space. Eye of Terror count, 1. Fulgrim, the Phoenician. Homeworld, Chemos, a dying industrial world whose population had been on the verge of collapse before Fulgrim arrived and personally organized them into functional civilization, then governed them through years of scarcity before the Emperor's fleets arrived. A perfectionist in every dimension, art, combat, music, aesthetic philosophy, defined by an absolute need for excellence that would become, eventually, the precise angle of attack his corruption required. During the cleansing of Laren, the Emperor's children's campaign against an alien race called the Lair, Fulgrim explored their great temple complex at the campaign's conclusion. That temple was dedicated to Slaanesh, the chaos god of excess and sensation. At its heart, Fulgrim found a sword, the blade of the Lair. He took it as a trophy. The blade was already a demon blade when he picked it up. Not a weapon that became corrupted through use. It arrived that way, with a Slaaneshi demon already housed within it, recovered from the inner sanctum of an alien temple specifically built in Slaanesh's service. Once Fulgrim claimed it, the demon began whispering. It used his perfectionism as the entry point, feeding his desire for transcendence, for the next level of sensation, for experiences that ordinary perception couldn't provide, until the distinction between his own ambitions and the demon's suggestions had completely dissolved. The corruption took months, possibly years of continuous contact. Fulgrim, by Graham McNeil, documents this progression in detail. At Istvan V, using the Lair demon blade, Fulgrim killed Ferrus Manus. Ferrus Manus was the Primarch of the Iron Hands, Legion 10, Homeworld Medusa, not the Iron Warriors. The Iron Warriors are Perturabo's Legion, Legion 4, and we will reach Perturabo momentarily. The Iron Hands and the Iron Warriors share a similar naming structure and almost nothing else, and conflating them is a specific, documented error that this script exists to preempt. Ferrus Manus had forearms coated in living silver metal from an encounter with a metallic creature in his youth. He was arguably Fulgrim's closest friend before chaos entered the picture. Fulgrim struck off his head with the layer blade at Istvan 5. His head went to Horus as a trophy. His body remained on the field. The Iron Hands refused to accept his death for years because no body was ever recovered. He was dead. Fulgrim is now a four-armed, serpentine demon prince of Slaanesh, believed to reside on a demon world called Kallax within the Eye of Terror. Eye of Terror count 2. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron. Homeworld, Olympia, Primarch of the Iron Warriors. The legion you deploy when you need an enemy fortification methodically converted into rubble, and who will resent every order that sent them there instead of somewhere with more glory attached to it. From very early in his life, Perturabo could perceive the Eye of Terror in his mind, a psychic sensitivity that let him sense what he described as the flaw in all things, a fundamental wrongness at the edge of perception. He was the one who named the Eye of Terror. The Primarch who would eventually rule from within it, also the Primarch who gave it its name. If that strikes you as meaningful, the 40K setting will generally reward that instinct. His resentment built over decades, grinding siege campaigns while other Primarchs won legendary victories in open battle. His expertise perpetually compared unfavorably to Rogal Dorn's approach, a persistent sense of being undervalued. When Olympia rebelled during the Heresy period, Perturabo ordered a massacre, approximately 5 million civilians dead at his legion's hands. He reportedly experienced genuine guilt afterward, which made him less stable rather than more. He joined Horus. His engineering expertise directed major portions of the Siege of Terra. After Horus died and the traitor forces collapsed, the Iron Warriors' retreat was notably orderly. Perturabo pulled his legion back intact, established a substantial domain within the Eye of Terror, rather than fragmenting the way other traitor legions did, and ascended to Daemon Prince of Chaos Undivided. Eye of Terror count 3. Named it, moved in, presumably supervised the layout. Magnus the Red, the Crimson King. Homeworld, Prospero, a world of scholars and psychically gifted individuals who had built a civilization around careful management of their abilities. Primarch of the Thousand Suns, the most powerful psyker in an imperium full of powerful psykers, driven by the absolute conviction that forbidden knowledge could be safely wielded by anyone of sufficient intelligence and discipline. His 1,000 sons were afflicted by a degenerative mutation, threatening to reduce them to formless chaos spawn. Magnus made a deal with Tzeentch to hold it back, trading something he didn't fully understand for the ability to preserve his sons. When he later discovered the Horus conspiracy, he attempted to warn the Emperor by forcing a psychic message directly through the warding around the Imperial Palace. The message reached the Emperor. It also tore apart a significant section of a city-scale secret infrastructure project as a side effect. The Emperor sent Leman Russ and the Space Wolves to bring Magnus to Terra to answer for this. Russ arrived on Prospero with his full legion, and the burning of Prospero destroyed the planet's civilization. Magnus survived the destruction of his physical form, reconstituting himself as a being of warp energy and retreating to a demon world called Sortiarius, the planet of sorcerers, where the 1,000 Suns rebuilt under his rule. Sortiarius sits within the Eye of Terror. In the aftermath, Magnus's chief librarian Ahriman cast the Rubric, a massive ritual designed to finally resolve the 1,000 Suns mutation. It encased most of the Legion in their armor as soulless automata, leaving only the powerful sorcerers with any remaining individuality. Magnus banished Ahriman for it. Ahriman has spent 10,000 years attempting to make it right, which goes about as well as anything involving Tzeentch ever does. In more recent lore, Magnus moved Sortiarius, the entire demon world, from the Eye of Terror into real space above Prospero during the siege of the Fenris system. He relocated a planet. If you want a single data point for what a demon Primarch of Tzeentch can accomplish on a motivated day, that's it. Eye of Terror count 4.
asterisk because this one takes his real estate on day trips. Mortarion, the Reaper, Homeworld, Arborus, a death world perpetually shrouded in toxic mist at altitude, controlled by sorcerer warlords who raised the population in dependence. One of those warlords raised Mortarion after finding him as a child.
Mortarion eventually overthrew and killed him. That formative experience produced a Primarch with intense distrust of psychic powers and genuine hatred of chaos. A man who considered sorcery the primary weapon of the powerful against the weak. His pre-heresy stance was, in its way, more principled than many loyal Primarchs who simply lacked the personal history to care. The Death Guard fleet was en route through the warp to Terra when it became becalmed, unable to exit, stranded with no way out. A plague swept the fleet. This was the Death Guard, a legion designed specifically for maximum physical endurance and resistance to disease and toxin, and it was killing them. Typhus was the first captain of the Death Guard, and he had long resented Mortarion's rigid anti-chaos stance. Exactly how much of what happened was Typhus actively engineering it versus opportunistically steering events once the fleet was trapped remains deliberately unclear in the primary sources. But what's unambiguous is the outcome. Typhus's actions and Nurgle's influence in the warp combined to produce a situation with no survivable exit. Mortarion, watching his unkillable legion dying around him, prayed to Nurgle for salvation. The prayer was answered. The Death Guard were transformed into plague-ridden servants of the Grandfather of Plagues, and Mortarion ascended as Nurgle's demon prince. The Primarch who most hated chaos was damned by the thing he most hated, at the exact moment his legion had no other options. The Pale King, by David Annandale, covers his full arc. He currently resides on a demon world within the Eye and has invaded real space in M42 events. Eye of Terror count, 5. Lorgar Aurelian, the Bearer of the Word. Homeworld, Colchis, Primarch of the Word Bearers. Lorgar built a religion around the Emperor during the Great Crusade. He needed to believe in something transcendent, needed a deity, and the Emperor seemed like the most reasonable candidate available. The Word Bearers evangelized everywhere they conquered, raising temples and codifying worship doctrine on every world they pacified. The Emperor wasn't enthusiastic. He sent Horus to deliver the message. Horus brought the Word-Bearers to Monarchia, their most sacred city, decades of religious construction representing the finest expression of their faith, and forced Lorgar and the entire legion to kneel before the assembled imperial population, while the Ultramarines raised Monarchia around them. Public humiliation, engineered to break the behavior pattern. It worked, in the sense that Lorgar stopped worshipping the Emperor. The official record called what followed a pilgrimage. It was a systematic theological conversion. Lorgar exploring the warp, studying chaos, concluding that the chaos gods were exactly what he'd been searching for. He came back a genuine convert. His word-bearer Erebus, the same Erebus who stole the anathema and arranged Horus's wounding on Davin's moon, was then deliberately positioned to corrupt the War Master. Lorgar engineered the conditions for the heresy years before the first shot was fired. He didn't join a rebellion. He built it and handed someone else the match. Lorgar ascended to Demon Prince of Chaos Undivided and reportedly retreated into prolonged contemplation somewhere within the Eye of Terror after the heresy's end. Eye of Terror count, 6. Conrad Kurze, the Night Haunter. Homeworld, Nostromo, a hive world in perpetual darkness where violent crime had become the organizing principle of society before Kurze arrived and instituted a different organizing principle, which was terror. He grew up with prophetic visions of death and violence. His interpretation, fear was the only deterrent that actually worked. The Night Lords applied theatrical mass execution everywhere the Great Crusade sent them, and it was tactically effective and comprehensively horrifying. Many summaries describe Kurze as a Chaos Primarch in the same way Angron or Lorgar are. This is inaccurate, and the distinction matters. Kurze wasn't a devotee of any Chaos god. He sided with Horus not from demonic corruption, but from ideological conviction. He believed the Emperor's Imperium was hypocritical, that it preached justice while employing exactly the kind of arbitrary, terrifying violence it condemned him for. He wanted that hypocrisy acknowledged. He didn't receive gods in exchange for his allegiance. He received the satisfaction of a point eventually illustrated. He arranged his own death. A Calidus assassin named Meshen was sent to eliminate him. Kurze found out, dismissed his guards, and waited for her. In his own framing, being killed by an Imperial assassin confirmed everything he had argued about the nature of the Imperium's justice. Meshen killed him, confirmed dead. He doesn't end up in the Eye of Terror. He ends up making a point, which was evidently the preferred outcome. Sanguinius, the Angel. Homeworld, Baal, a radioactive wasteland where survival required hunting whatever hunted you. He had literal white-feathered wings from birth, marking him as either divine or monstrous depending on who was looking. He also had prophetic ability, and he used it fully. He knew his death was coming. He told his sons what he had seen in terms clear enough that there was no reasonable ambiguity, and then spent the remaining years walking toward it with complete knowledge of what the final step would be. He died at the Siege of Terra, killed by Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit just before the Emperor's final confrontation with the War Master. That death left something behind. A psychic wound encoded into every Blood Angel's gene seed. Sanguinius's dying terror and fury, preserved in his son's biology and surfacing in battle at moments of extremity, as what the Blood Angels call the Black Rage. A space marine in the grip of its reliving his Primarch's last moments, overriding consciousness with 10,000-year-old death. The Blood Angels manage it. They maintain specialized units called the Death Company for those who fall into it. It costs them something every generation. Sanguinius is confirmed dead. Ferrus Manus. The Gorgon. Homeworld, Medusa, a frozen industrial world of technoclans. Primarch of the Iron Hands. Legion 10. A legion built around the conviction that flesh is weak and metal is dependable, which Ferrus Manus embodied literally. His forearms were coated in living silver metal from an encounter with a metallic creature in his youth. He valued the union of flesh and machine, and was, by most accounts, Fulgrim's closest friend before the corruption. His death at Isstvan V is covered in Fulgrim's section. The Iron Hands' response to their Primarch's death has been 10,000 years of increasingly extensive cybernetic augmentation, which functions simultaneously as cultural expression and extended memorial. No body was recovered. His head was taken as a trophy. He is confirmed dead. Rogal Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra. Homeworld, the Inuit Cluster, a system of ice worlds in the galactic northeast. The Emperor found him aboard his flagship, the Phalanx, a mobile fortress monastery Dorn had apparently constructed on his own initiative before the Emperor arrived. A floating defensive installation that functioned as Legion base and stronghold simultaneously. Primarch of the Imperial Fists. He designed the defenses of the Imperial Palace for the Siege of Terra and later assessed those defenses as insufficient, which tells you most of what you need to know about him as a personality. His fate after the Heresy. Reportedly killed during the First Black Crusade in M32. Only his hands were recovered. His body was never found. Official status: missing, presumed dead. The same framing used when the evidence strongly implies death, but the absence of remains prevents confirmation. Presumed dead. Lion L. Johnson, the Lion. Homeworld, Caliban, a death world of vast mutated forests full of creatures that killed everything they encountered. That environment shaped every survivor toward the same endpoint: methodical, focused on completing objectives, minimal emotional expression. Primarch of the Dark Angels, Strategically gifted, intensely secretive, perceived by nearly everyone around him as fundamentally unreadable. He had a childhood mentor on Caliban named Luther, one of the knights who found L. Johnson in the forest as a child and educated him. Luther fought alongside L. Johnson through the Great Crusade's early years before being assigned back to Caliban, a decision L. Johnson made for military reasons that Luther experienced as abandonment. Luther accumulated grievances for years with the Dark Angels who hadn't departed with the main fleet, and by the end of the Heresy had converted to chaos and led a rebellion against his former Primarch. Caliban destroyed itself in the fighting. L. Johnson was mortally wounded and disappeared. He had been in stasis. The Rock, the fortress monastery the Dark Angels built from Caliban's remnants, had him inside it, healing, for 10,000 years while his chapter venerated him as a living saint without knowing he was sleeping beneath their floor. He returned in M42 and is currently active in Imperium Nihilus. The Lion, by Mike Brooks, published in 2023, covers his awakening. Roboute Guilliman, The Avenging Sun. Homeworld, Macragge, Primarch of the Ultramarines and the closest thing the Imperium has to functioning administration in any era. He wrote the Codex Astartes, the foundational document that restructured the Space Marine legions into smaller, independent chapters after the Heresy, designed to prevent any single figure from commanding a force of the scale that had enabled the Heresy in the first place. His defense of Ultramar held the Imperium's eastern regions intact, while everything else collapsed. Fulgrim poisoned him at the Heresy's end with a tainted blade. Guilliman entered stasis, not dead, suspended at the threshold, and sat in a shrine his descendants built around him for 10,000 years, while the Imperium he'd designed degenerated into something he wouldn't entirely recognize. He returned in M41/M42, restored with the intervention of the Inari, and currently serves as Lord Commander of the Imperium. Various Black Library sources document his response to what 10,000 years of stewardship has produced, considerably worse than what he built and left. He is writing new doctrines as fast as they're needed. Dark Imperium by Guy Haley covers his return. Leman Russ, The Wolf King. Homeworld, Fenris, a death world of ice and sea and massive predators, producing space wolves who embodied their world's apex predators in almost every characteristic. Russ was the Emperor's enforcer, the Primarch sent to handle situations other Primarchs couldn't or wouldn't, including other Primarchs who stepped out of bounds. He raised Prospero. He was effective at the necessary ugliness. After the Heresy, Russ held a final feast at the Fang, the Space Wolves' mountain fortress. He deliberately left Bjorn the Fell-Handed behind, the only surviving member of his personal retinue who would have accompanied him. Russ instructed Bjorn to be interred in a dreadnought, specifically so that a living space wolf would remain who remembered the chapter's origins. Then he left, saying, "For the wolf time," a reference to the prophesied final battle at the end of all things from Fenrisian mythology. His destination, reportedly, was the Eye of Terror. He hasn't returned. Eye of Terror count, 7. This one went in voluntarily, armed for Ragnarok. Jaghatai Khan, the Warhawk. Homeworld, Chagoris, also called Mundus Planus. A world of vast open steppe where nomadic cavalry culture produced the Khan's philosophy entirely. Speed, independence, the refusal to be pinned down, contempt for any position that couldn't be abandoned the moment it stopped being useful. The White Scars were the fastest legion and among the most difficult to predict. After the Heresy, while pursuing Dark Eldar raiders, Khan disappeared into the Webway, the sub-dimensional tunnel network running through the galaxy, a separate navigational infrastructure distinct from both real space and the warp. His current status: missing in the Webway. The Webway isn't the Eye of Terror. They are different locations with different properties. If a Primarch explainer puts Jaghatai Khan in the Eye of Terror, That is the wrong lore. He went somewhere else entirely, and the distinction isn't minor. One is Chaos's permanent home address, the other is a labyrinthine network of tunnels that functions as its own separate geography. Khan chose the labyrinth. Vulcan, the Lord of Drakes. Homeworld, Nocturne, a volcanic death world where periodic extinction-level events called the Time of Trials periodically destroyed civilization and forced survivors to rebuild from nothing, producing a culture that valued endurance, craftsmanship, and the protection of the vulnerable above the projection of strength. The Salamanders are, despite every aspect of their homeworld and their nature as Astartes, the most consistently compassionate space marine chapter in the Imperium. Vulcan was also a perpetual, functionally immortal, capable of resurrecting from any death. What happened to him after Istvan V involved extended periods of being killed and returning and being killed again under circumstances several parties specifically arranged to exploit his inability to permanently die. He survived them. His current status in M42 primary sources isn't clearly established. Missing. Corvus Corax, the Raven Lord. Homeworld, Deliverance, originally called Lycius, a prison moon where his people were enslaved to serve the industrialists of the world below, until Corax led the revolution that freed them. The Raven Guard became everything that Origin produced: guerrilla tactics, assassination, shadow operations, the understanding that winning requires hitting from angles the enemy doesn't anticipate. Istvan V devastated the Raven Guard. Corax received access to accelerated gene seed cultivation techniques from the Emperor and used them to try to rebuild his legion rapidly. The results weren't space marines. They were mutant creatures produced by a process the ruinous powers had corrupted in transit, barely human in some cases. Corax destroyed them. He locked himself in the Raven's Tower for a year before vanishing entirely. By multiple accounts, Corvus Corax was reportedly last seen in or near the Eye of Terror. The precise circumstances of how or why he entered it aren't fully documented in primary sources. Eye of Terror count, 8. Corax apparently wandered in after everything else had already gone wrong. Now to the two Primarchs whose names aren't in any record that survived. The 2nd and 11th Legions each had a Primarch. Both were found during the Great Crusade. The Imperial Palace contained a chamber called the Investiary, which held statues of all 20 Primarchs on 20 plinths. By the time the Horus Heresy began, 2 of those plinths were empty, not because the statues were never built, but because they had been taken down. In Descent of Angels by Mitchell Scanlon, set in the M30.84Os, Lion L. Johnson is described as having 19 brothers, all 20 Primarchs officially acknowledged at that point in the timeline. The expungement came later, and it was entirely deliberate. The process used is called damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory, the formal eradication of a person from all official records. Names deleted. Legion histories struck. Physical monuments removed. This happened while the Emperor was still active among his subjects, at least 43 standard years before the drop site massacre at Istvan V. These weren't Primarchs lost in the confusion of war. They were found, acknowledged, given legions, and then deliberately erased. The Chamber at the End of Memory by James Swallow is the Black Library text that engages most directly with what happened. The short story centers on Rogal Dorn encountering fragments of information about the lost Primarchs. One passage frames their tragedies as possible precursors to the Horus Heresy itself, a suggestion that whatever happened with them was serious enough that the Emperor chose total obliteration of the record over any form of disclosure. Fulgrim, the Palatine Phoenix by Josh Reynolds, contains a reference from Fulgrim to his quiet brother and master of the second, placing that Primarch among the first 8 rediscovered by the Emperor during the Great Crusade, confirming Fulgrim knew him personally, and establishing that he was significant enough to be specifically remembered in that context decades later. Why were they erased? Dan Abnett has stated on record that he considers it very unlikely Black Library will ever officially resolve this. The reasons are deliberately kept in shadow. What appears consistent across multiple sources is that the Lost Legion's soldiers weren't destroyed with their Primarchs. They were reportedly absorbed into other legions after the erasure, stripped of their specific identity and folded into formations that continued under different designations. The record simply no longer says which formations or how many Marines. 2 Primarchs, found, erased. The empty plinths are what's left. And now, officially, the last Primarch. Officially. Alfarius, Primarch of the Alpha Legion. Encountered by Horus approximately in M30.981, making him the 20th and final Primarch discovered during the Great Crusade, roughly 180 years after Horus was the first. Public record. Canonical timeline. Established across multiple sources. Alfarius, Head of the Hydra by Mike Brooks, would like a word about that timeline. The novel's central revelation. Alfarius wasn't the last Primarch discovered. He was the first, found by the Emperor long before the Great Crusade found the others, then deliberately hidden within the Imperial Palace itself while the search for the remaining Primarchs continued across 180 years. The Emperor and his advisor Malcador concealed his existence. Then Alfarius, with his twin brother Omegon, staged a public discovery by Horus as the apparent 20th and final Primarch. There have always been 2 of them, Alfarius and Omegon, identical twins who considered themselves one soul in 2 bodies, sharing the Alpha Legion jointly. Either could function as the public face of the Legion at any time. Their physical appearance was indistinguishable. The entire institutional culture of the Alpha Legion was built from this premise. Anyone could be either of them at any moment, including each other, and the Legion operated from the position that this ambiguity was a tactical asset. A significant portion of Alpha Legion doctrine involves its members claiming to be Alfarius, all of them, simultaneously. The Emperor was aware of the twin situation. Whether the dual existence was an intentional feature of the original Primarch project or the result of an embryo splitting during the Chaos God's interference with the gestation capsules is a question the lore deliberately leaves unanswered. Run the discovery sequence honestly. The official record says Alfarius was last found. The novel says Alfarius was actually the first found by the Emperor, held in secret while the Great Crusade found everyone else. Omegon entered the picture somewhere later in the timeline and, when encountered, identified himself as Alfarius. So the person publicly found last by Horus was presenting as Alfarius, while the original Alfarius had been in the Imperial Palace all along. Omegon, found at some point in the middle of that 180-year span while identifying himself as Alfarius, was also technically the last one found, under the name Alfarius. Depending on which twin you're counting, which account you accept as authoritative, and which Alfarius you're tracking, both first found and last found are simultaneously accurate and incorrect in ways that recursively double back on each other. The Alpha Legion built its entire identity from exactly this kind of constructed ambiguity. Their official allegiance is traitor. They fought for Horus. Their actual allegiance is the most contested question in 40K fan discussion, because multiple sources suggest the betrayal may have been a calculated long game against chaos rather than genuine devotion to it. Whether that interpretation holds depends entirely on which source you treat as reliable, which is either the point or an accident of how the lore was written. One twin was reportedly killed by Rogal Dorn. Which one is deliberately unconfirmed? The survivor's current fate is unknown. Whether either of them is active in M42 and in what capacity was designed by the lore to be unanswerable. The Primarch officially found last was secretly found first. His twin was found somewhere in the middle while claiming to be the first. Nobody can confirm which one is dead. Their true allegiance may not be what it appears. Laughs in Alfarius. 20 Primarchs. Final accounting. Confirmed dead. Horus, killed by the Emperor at the Siege of Terra. Sanguinius, killed by Horus at the same siege just before. Ferrus Manus, killed by Fulgrim at Istvan V. Conrad Kurze, killed by Machen on his own terms. 4 confirmed dead. Rogal Dorn, missing. Presumed dead since the First Black Crusade in M32. Hands recovered, body not found. Active and returned. Lion L. Johnson, back in M42, operating in Imperium Nihilus. Roboute Guilliman, back in M41/M42, currently Lord Commander of the Imperium. Missing. Jaghatai Khan, somewhere in the webway. Vulcan, whereabouts unclear in M42 primary sources. Alpharius Omegon, 1 reportedly dead, 1 unaccounted for. Reliability of any account concerning them approximately 0 by design. Expunged, 2 Primarchs, found and acknowledged and then erased. Names gone from every record that survived. In the Eye of Terror, Perturabo, who named it, ruling as Demon Prince of Chaos Undivided. Fulgrim, 4-armed Demon Prince of Slaanesh, on the demon world Kallax. Angron, Demon Prince of Khorne, base of operations in the Eye, but frequently invading real space. Mortarion, Demon Prince of Nurgle, on a demon world within it. Magnus, Demon Prince of Tzeentch, ruling Sortiarius, the planet of sorcerers, from within the Eye when he hasn't moved the whole planet somewhere else. Lorgar, reportedly in deep contemplation somewhere inside it. Leman Russ, reportedly entered it saying, "For the wolf time." Corvus Corax, reportedly last seen there. 8 Primarchs, in the one location that functions as the galaxy's permanent chaos address. Perturabo named it, which means he built his own grave marker before he died. 20 sons of the Emperor, some loyal, some traitor, some lost, some still out there. A frankly unreasonable number of them sharing the same warp rift. If you made it this far, you either learned something new or you already have a correction typed and ready, and honestly, both are the right response. Subscribe for more.